Good day, everybody. Welcome to Making Life Brighter Radio. I'm your host, Winifred Adams, and we have a very special show for you. I have not deep dived into this particular subject matter yet, because we've been talking about global banking, we've been talking about quantum, we've been talking about the physics of quantum, but we have an expert in our midst today, and someone who's a very prolific author and educator, and I really want to bring this to your attention. So let's start with a proper introduction of Mr. Chris Rutkowski. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for being with us today.
You're
Chris
most,
is
yeah, you're most welcome. Thank you.
he is a prolific author on ufology, ufology, I guess is the better way to say it,
Mhm.
and he has written many books. I I ask you to please follow him along, and you can find him on LinkedIn as Chris Rutkowski, science writer and communicator. He is also a children's book author, which is fascinating because he actually bridged the gap for kids that see these things and maybe don't get anyone to share with, but or who don't believe them. And so, as we know, those of us that do believe and have seen them, and I am one of them, you know that people think you're crazy, but when you've seen it, you can't deny it. So, Chris Rutkowski has 9 published books, including Visitations in 1989, Unnatural History in 1998, Mysterious Manitoba, co-authored with Dave Creighton and Brian Fiedler in 1997, Abductions and Aliens. That's a great one. Canadian UFO Report, co-authored with Jeff Dittman in 2006. A World of UFOs. I Saw It Too, which is the children's book. And The Big Book of UFOs in 2010. And When They Appeared, co-authored with Stan Michalak. Is that right?
It's actually Mihalik.
Mihalik. Okay, in
Yeah.
2019. His most recent book, well, now he has even a more recent book, but his most recent book is Canada's UFOs Declassified, and that's really important in terms of what we're going to talk about today. He's contributed many writings, and he has been authored in anthologies and Frontiers of Reality and UFO in 1947 through 1997. He has been an educator, though he's retired now, and he has been an educator in astronomy. Is that correct?
Astronomy, yeah, yeah.
And you have spent your life teaching, really, at
Mhm.
university, and now you've kind of taken a back seat and are actually authoring more and writing. And you have a new book out on Morse code. Is that correct?
No, that's not
No,
me. That's
that's
not
not
me.
you. So let's erase that. If you are looking up Chris Rutkowski, there are several of them, just so you know.
Mhm.
This has happened to me more than once in
Mhm. Mhm.
journalism,
Yeah,
science writer and communicator, educator and wordsmith. Look that up.
yeah.
So Chris has an amazing Amazon presence, and he has these beautiful books that he's written with his deep dive research. And his specialty is looking into ufology, but in the Canadian and worldwide sector. So, but he has quite a bit of research of things that we aren't commonly privy to. And so I'm going to jump right in and let him go forward because we have many questions regarding all the things that we've been talking about here on Making Life Brighter of the world and how the world is keeping secrets from us, including, and I want to touch on this, Chris, today, cold plasma. I want to get into anything you might know about cold plasma regarding
Okay,
UFOs.
okay,
So take it
okay.
away.
Okay. Well, first of all, I thank you for the wonderful introduction. It went very long, and it's embarrassing that I that you mentioned so many. I do have another book that's coming out. It's not published yet, but I've just been talking with my publisher about it. It's going to come out next year. It's also about UFOs, but a lot of your viewers and listeners probably don't know a lot about me. So I'm going to share my screen now and we can sort of
Love it.
go
Yeah, let's
back
do it.
and forth a little bit.
Okay.
So you should be able to see that it's um, Canada and UAP or UFOs, however you want to call it. And Oh, I gotta go down here. Okay, so your viewers and listeners might remember that the term UFO and UAP was in the news just a few years ago from these balloons or whatever they were that were flying over North America and were shot down by the United States Air Force. The first one was a Chinese balloon that came all the way across the Pacific Ocean and was shot down eventually after passing all over North America and the United States off Myrtle Beach. And then there were three other objects that were seen and shot down. February 10th over Dead Horse, Alaska, February 11th in the Yukon, and February 12th over Lake Huron in Michigan, which was actually on the sort of the border between Michigan and Ontario. So there's a lot of Canadian connection here. NORAD was involved, the North American defense system that we're partnered. Canada and the United States are partnered with. It turns out that it was actually a Canadian commander of NORAD that was in charge at the time, but it was American fighter jets that shot these things down. Now, we know a lot about what went on back then because in the United States, maybe some of you know about the Freedom of Information Act requests that you can file for official government documents. In Canada, we have something called access to information requests. And basically you file and say, I would like government documents on this particular subject. Now, it's quite interesting that despite the fact that all these balloons or whatever they were shot down over the United States and Canada, were done so by American jets. People have filed information requests about that from the government, the United States government, and the Pentagon has not released a single document on this. So we don't have a lot of detail. Interestingly enough, when you ask the Canadian government about this, we were able to get more than 500 pages of official government documents from the Air Force in conjunction with NORAD in the United States. And in fact, we were able to get the UAP-23 search and recovery plan, which was the UAP-23 was the name of the balloon that was shot down over Yukon. And this is the official government document. And we have, I'm not going to show you all the 500 pages, but this just shows you that Canada is actually a little more transparent than the United States. We got all these documents, but not a single document from the United States. As a matter of fact, this document is even more detailed. It's actually the briefing for Canada's Prime Minister, who was Justin Trudeau at the time. It's classified, as you can see, secret, confidence of the King's Privy Council, very official, all this sort of stuff with the official Canadian coat of arms. NORAD had been tracking UAP-23 over the Yukon, and this is just a couple of the hundreds of pages of documents that show there was intense government interest in this, but not a single document from the United States has ever been released about this. So keep that in mind, because one would wonder, how do I get this sort of stuff? Well, I've been at this for a long, long time. You can tell by the age of the computer in the left-hand photo that I've been cataloging UFO reports for quite some time. The photo on the right, in the top there, that's 1 year's worth of UFO reports in Canada. We get somewhere around 700 to 1,000 UFO reports every year. And back then we still were doing it the old-fashioned way on paper. We still do because it's, electronic is fine. But this is 1 year's worth. And I've been on a lot of TV shows, various kinds. I was on the original Unsolved Mysteries. As a matter of fact, I just came from filming another show that's going to be on History Channel, probably next March, something like that. So I've been involved in this for quite some time. One of my first books is called Unnatural History, and because I'm up in Canada, I wanted to focus on things that were in my literal neighborhood. And so I focused on UFOs, abductions, crop circles, hauntings, so paranormal connection, and Sasquatches and other, creatures like Dogman.
Good.
But
Let's get into Dogman. No, go ahead.
yeah, but this is one of the books that I had, and I've been doing a lot of speaking. I was considered a maven apparently a few years ago at a special speaker series. So I've been doing a lot of presentations over the years, and I've been involved in a lot of organizations. On the left is me at the site of what's called the White Horse. It's a statue of a ghost that's said to be galloping across the Canadian prairie. There's a wonderful tradition story about indigenous people and how a woman and a man were supposed to be married, and the father disallowed the marriage, so they hopped on this horse and rode across the plain away from rode from the village. And there was a tragic story ending, but the horse escaped, and to this day is said to be seen galloping across the Canadian prairie. So I was actually called Winnipeg's Ghostbuster because I was doing so much busting of ghosts and investigating. And on the right, I'm a consultant with the Winnipeg Paranormal Group, which goes into haunted locations across our area and does some investigating. And this just shows you one of the things that we go to. This is actually catacombs that are up here in Canada, in Manitoba, that we're looking into and investigating. Very, very creepy. Lots of bats in there.
It looks creepy. It
Yeah,
does.
very,
It looks
very.
kind of gargoyle-ish. And
Yes, yeah, it's very, very
what is
creepy.
it actually? It's catacombs, but where does that?
It's it's in a little town called what was the name of the town now?
Well, is it
Cooks
a
Creek.
monastery or
It's
some?
it's it's a a church that has created sort of a duplication of Lourdes,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
Lord, yeah.
and
Well, are
they've
there
created,
miracles or is
yeah,
it? It looks
yeah,
kind of hellish.
miracles, yeah, yeah, and so they've created it, and they hold a lot of ceremonies there and services and that type of thing, but it's very, very creepy.
Well, hopefully it's of the good kind. Yeah.
Yeah. And here I am inside a crop circle here in Canada. As you can see, I was outstanding in my field. Har, 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 har.
Yes.
This is one of the first ones that appeared in North America, as a matter of fact. In fact, we had many,
Mhm.
many more in North America than in Britain. And so we have more, more involved in to study them. So here's a couple more of my books. Actually, Visitations is my first book, and then on the right, my book on abductions. I actually worked with people who believed that they had been abducted by aliens and family members and so forth. I spoke to many. I actually facilitated a support group for people, and this was actually quite interesting. This was back in the 90s. We don't hear much about them, about abductions anymore. We're into more contactees and psionics and spiritual connections and that type of thing. But the actual abduction stories seem to have really dried up in recent times. But it showed to me, because I was, into the UFO thing. It was more of a nuts and bolts kind of thing, crop circles caused by UFO landings or whatever, and government documents about things that were shot down. So these are physical objects. But the abduction phenomenon really underscored to me that there's another human side to all of this, and this sort of ties in with your work and your focus of what you're doing. For example, I received this letter during my work on abductions, and this is a excerpt from a letter from the parent of a boy, and it was an appeal to me for help. I'm looking for help. I helped my child since January of '99. Since he was 3 years old, he had been bothered by aliens, as he feels at one time during his younger years he may have been visited by these creatures. He's always been upset and afraid that they will be back for him. Some nights are worse than others. And then the next section, he can describe what he has seen, when and where he was. This tortures him daily for too many years, and he just wants a few answers so he can put it finally to best. The torturing of somebody who believes that they were abducted by aliens, they're bothered. This is something that is very crucial to their being. It's upset their worldview, and our goal as investigators and researchers is to try and figure out what happened. But when somebody has, had some anxieties and some serious issues with what's happened to them, that takes it to another level. And we really are more counselors and healers in so many ways than just investigators. So this
Well,
shows you some of the
uh,
aspects. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sure you've encountered this along your research, but in researching, you're listening to other people telling their story. And just in the listening, there can be some kind of healing. I mean, have you experienced that along the way that you,
Absolutely, absolutely. Some people just want somebody to listen to them. Um, and I remember there was a nurse who came to me, and she had an abduction story. She said she had finished her night shift at like 3 in the morning, came back home, and she was getting ready for bed in her bedroom, and there was a loud bang and boom out in her hallway. And she went out into their living room, and she saw the classic round head. Well, not the classic, actually, a round-headed object, a creature with round eyes. There were two of them, um, and she interacted with them, and there's sort of a longer story which I describe in a couple of my books that happened to her. But I asked her, "What do you want me to do with this story?" And she said, "Well, you're the UFO guy. I just thought you should know about this." I said, "Well, do you want me to, talk to your neighbors? Do you want me to go on TV and in the papers asking people if they have any, if anybody saw it too?" And she said, "No, I don't eat uh, anchovy pizzas, and I don't have vivid dreams and all that sort of thing." And she says when she had finished interacting with these two creatures, she suddenly found herself several hours later had not been to bed. The bed was still unmade, and she was sitting in her bedroom with all her clothes on. Um, she says, I don't know what happened to me, but it's just one of those things, and I felt that I should tell somebody." So that even the just telling and sharing this can be very cathartic and can be very, very useful for people. When somebody sees a UFO, sometimes they just need some affirmation that, yeah, you're one of, millions of people. In fact, in North America, it's believed that 10% of the population believe they've seen UFOs. So, out of the United States, your population is what, 400 million or something like that. So that means 40 million people believe they've seen UFOs. That's a good company to be in.
it,
There's a lot of people who've had similar experiences.
it's extensive. I think it's far more reaching. It's just not as popular a subject matter because people are afraid to be um, ridiculed or have their feelings invalidated. And
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
but if
Yeah.
you are one of those people, you just know because you can't unknow what you experienced or know.
That's right. And there's a lot of supporting evidence. I mentioned, this is one year's worth of document of cases. Um, and it's not just the average person on the street. This is an official UFO report from NORAD, from the United States Air Force, Canadian Air Force. This is what the front page of a UFO report looks like. You can see at the bottom it says UFO report. So the government and military actually do have UFO reports. Um, and this one was sent to me by NORAD because I have been working with the government on a number of issues, and I asked them to please send me these reports, and they've been relatively forthcoming. Now, why is that so? Well, this is the Canadian version of the FAA, NAV Canada. And there are actually instructions for pilots to follow under certain circumstances. And this is their manual. And it actually says here under pilot reports, communication instructions for reporting vital intelligence sightings. Reports should be made immediately of anything that is hostile, suspicious, unidentified, or engaged in possible illegal smuggling activity. Examples include unidentified flying objects. Pilots are actually told if they see a UFO, report it. And and it says reports should be made to the nearest Canadian or United States air traffic unit. So pilots are actually told to do this, and we actually do get reports. Not just pilots, but personnel on ships, merchant marines, and so forth, and all airborne and waterborne objects which appear to be hostile, suspicious, or unidentified. The following are examples: guided missiles. Well, I assume if you see a guided missile, you might want to tell somebody about it. But
That might be a good idea.
unidentified flying objects. If you're on your sailboat on the lake and you see either a UFO or a submarine, you probably should report those. And this is actually, what the
A
government wants
real
you to do.
bona fide
Yeah,
report. Now, have these are some from the past, but have there been more recent ones continued to this day where pilots are reporting?
absolutely. In fact, there's been about 500 reports from pilots over the past, I don't know, let's say 15 years or so. This is one from 2019. This is one where there were a four-plane formation of Harvards, which are jets, military jets, that UFO passed within 6,500 feet. And the unidentified object did not show up on radar, and it passed within a formation of military jets. And this was actually in this one was actually in Canada, but I have others from all across North America. This is quite an interesting one. This is a report from 2023, just a few years ago. So an unidentified object was reported by a pilot on the ground south of, this is in Toronto, between runways. So the pilot was walking between aircraft. The object was 1,000 feet above him, heading in a northeast to southwest direction. It was 10 to 20 feet in diameter, sphere-shaped, white or light gray. But this was at an airport, and it wasn't a balloon, and it wasn't anything else. It wasn't a plane, and a pilot saw it. So this is pretty weird when you think about it.
Well, it's profound because that would be putting his reputation in question to report something like that, especially at the airport where they're supposed to have control over the airspace. But clearly, that is moving in and about in the airspace and out
Mhm.
again, right? So,
Absolutely. And it's not just commercial pilots, we have military pilots. This is a document that I obtained from NORAD. You can actually see in the middle there, classification secret blank. It won't say what level of secret it was, but secret's good enough. And it's down at the bottom. You can't read it too well there, so I blew it up here. Um, from air traffic control, a United Airlines flight heading towards, I think that was Edmonton, reported an identified object 8,000 feet above him, flying the same directions. However, on radar, there was no objects there. And other radar operators and air traffic controllers did a playback and saw nothing. But this was clearly seen by United Airlines flight just a matter of a few years ago. And this is a secret document that was released to us. So we do get some of these. I'll just
well,
quickly show you
isn't
this one.
isn't Edmonton one of the foremost UFO, um, uh, the place where they see them the most in Canada? Is that a hot spot?
Absolutely, there's a hot spot just west of Edmonton, and this actually comes from the same area. This is what a UFO report form looks like from the United States, from NORAD, and also from Canada. This was seen by, right in the middle, you can't make it out that well, but it says Captain Blank, who was the tower controller at Cold Lake, which is very close to Edmonton. He saw a UFO and filled out this UFO report. This wasn't the pilot. This was the guy in the control tower who should know what's up in the sky, and he saw a UFO. So it's a little bit of everything. And the Canadian government very recently um, did a study that was released just this year on what Canadian pilots and military departments are doing with regard to UFOs. This is a brief to the Minister of National Defense, which would be the equivalent of, imagine a brief to the new Secretary of War in the United States, but in Canada it was the Minister of National Defense. And in there, they're saying this is what's been done over the past number of years. There was Defense Research Board, National Research Council, and then this fellow named Chris Rutkowski was overseeing the annual UFO survey. So they told, the equivalent of the Secretary of War that I'm doing this, and had my
Good.
photo. So so
And
that was a little bit,
you got put on the map and then some.
that was very strange. Now I want to focus on one case to just to move forward from here. I know you want to talk about newer stuff, but this is pretty interesting. This is probably one of the best cases ever recorded anywhere, and you may not know much about it. But in 1967, and I know that's a long time ago, but bear with me, a fellow named Mihalek, was the sort of the topic of the book that you mentioned. He was doing some amateur prospecting in a forested area in Canada, and without fudging it, a Hollywood-style flying saucer came down and landed. And where is it now? I thought I had a 3D model of it, but it came down, and it was the disc-shaped, saucer-shaped object with a dome and lights came down, and that's what it looked like. There was an exhaust vent on the side of it, and when this thing took off, it sent out a blast of hot gas, which set fire to his clothes and left behind marks on his body. This was investigated not just by regular investigators, was investigated by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Air Force, and there were samples, material left on the ground. And it says here, the report from Dr. Booth, who is a radioactive expert, he says the radiation found at the site is from a radium source and is a possible serious health hazard. So there's radiation found where this thing was landed. And they were going to send samples to the RCMP crime detection laboratory, but we're going to send you with the necessary shipping labels since the radioactive level in the soil sample precludes shipping by mail. Apparently, you can't send radioactive stuff through the mail. Who knew?
Yeah, and I'm sure the Post wouldn't accept that no matter what. Can you imagine? Now,
And this is some of the stuff that they found at the site, radioactive metal.
and so when they test this and they see that it's radioactive, and this seems to be a common theme, right? This is
Mhm.
going on in many sites where they've been seen or have come down or people have been affected.
Yeah.
Um, and so they find this radiation, but the radiation dissipates over time or it continues in the area.
Well, the half-life of some of these radioactive materials is very, very long. So the area can still be radioactive, but they sort of cleaned it up. They scrubbed up and took out all the pieces that they could find. Some of these pieces are still around, and they are radioactive still, but it's no longer dangerous to be at that particular site. In
But
fact,
there's
go
something
ahead.
about the trees in the forest, though, that you had mentioned at one point. What did they come to understand regarding radiation and the actual topography?
Yeah, some of the leaves on the trees seem to have been withered unnaturally. I mean, apart from the fact that there was radiation found at the site, and then there were these burns that were on this fellow himself, there was some physical effects. And so when you have a UFO report with a report of a disc, and you can locate the site, and there's radiation found at the site, it was investigated by the military, and we have all these documents available to us because we obtained them. This is way better than Roswell, because even now the United States government says nothing happened at Roswell. They don't admit anything happened. So the Canadian government says, yeah, this stuff happened, and in the documentation from the RCMP and the National Defense, the Air Force, neither the DND nor RCMP investigation teams were able to provide evidence to dispute Mr. Mihalek's story. Although the investigation has been completed, a satisfactory explanation or conclusion is still lacking. They said, we have no idea what happened. So when you have government investigators and military investigators saying we don't know what happened, but acknowledge something happened, that shows that it's a real physical event, and something that has affected a lot of people.
Well, it seems
And
to me that there's some understanding regarding radiation, and it would be curious, do we know of any peoples that have been abducted and they come back radiated or have radiation type symptomology, or they have some, or are they preserved on account of that?
To my
Is
yeah, to my knowledge, none of the abductees that I'm aware of, came back with evidence of being irradiated. This fellow, Mr. Mihalik, was taken to a nuclear plant where they have full body testing and all that sort of stuff, and he was not radioactive. So, thank goodness for that. But nevertheless, these things are reported from time to time, and it's something we have to keep in mind.
well, can I ask you this, and we'll just pause for a second in your presentation because
Sure.
we'll get back to it, but I mentioned the concept of cold fusion and plasma and all that, and then when we talk about the quantum with UFOs, there is a understanding through some people that the quanta of the propulsion system is either a cold fusion plasma situation or a sentient being with a quantum type flux computer, quantum vortex, or toroidal field that moves these things in all directions at once. Do you know anything about that you can comment on, and the research of these actual, because they're coming down and they're leaving radiation behind.
Mhm.
But would cold plasma or a sentient being leave radiation behind? So what is it that's leaving this radiation? What is it that's
Yeah, well, that's a really, really good question because um, this disc-shaped object, and there's no question that something was seen. In fact, it looked metallic, and it had these ports, and had a doorway that opened, and this exhaust vent, and this exhaust blast of gas came out. Um, and the we don't have any idea of any device. Like, it's not a vertical takeoff aircraft. It wasn't a helicopter. We don't have anything that we know of in manufactured right now that can do that. So it must have been something else. And the something else that has been suggested is, like you say, some sort of plasma, some sort of toroidal electromagnetic propulsion, that type of thing. Of course, there was a blast of gas, so it wasn't completely electromagnetic. But the fact that there was a blast of hot gas suggests it was something terrestrial, so maybe from a secret laboratory or
right?
something like
Did they
that. In
make
fact,
it?
yeah, in fact, this the fellow, Mr. Mihalik, he was had been in the military in Europe, and he didn't believe in aliens himself. In fact, to his death, and he died a number of years ago. But he never thought in terms of aliens and alien spacecraft. He thought this was some sort of military experiment that had gone off course and happened to land, in Canada as opposed to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Um, so the idea was that something was like that. Now, my background, I have degrees in astronomy uh, and education, and part of the astronomy was in terms of physics. So um, it certainly is possible. Now, cold fusion, there had been a number of experiments and announcements, 20, 30 years ago, that didn't turn out to be much. But since then, there have been continual developments on fusion reactors and so forth. And there will
And the
be some.
disappearing airplane, Ashton Forbes is always talking
Oh
about
yeah,
how the
yeah,
plasma orbs took the
yeah,
airplane away, right?
yeah. Orbs,
Mhm.
absolutely. There are plasmas that are detected. In fact, my undergraduate thesis was on something called tectonic strain emissions, which are orbs that are created in laboratories and also in nature, and manufactured separately as well by people in labs. So there are some connections here, and the possibility exists that this was some sort of exotic propulsion system, because we don't know what this could have been. So the possibility does exist that this was something that was propelled by a device that we have no real knowledge about, but has been speculated many times.
Well, I did speak to a fella that is on par with Jason Bourne in the movie, and he said that he had gone down into Area 52 underneath at one point in his career. And
Hmm.
he actually was put in one of these things, and they went out and back to the Kuiper Belt in about 7 minutes. And I said, were you physically in this and you were, you weren't under some kind of drug or something? He said, I was awake, I was conscious, and I physically rode in this and came back.
Yeah, it's very possible that that such devices have been made and are under development and testing, and they're just so highly classified. We just don't know. Well, I mean, I showed you these documents, even just a simple UFO report, classified secret. Well, just imagine how highly classified, if I had access to this document, just imagine how highly classified a device, or a ship like that could be. So it's way above my classification level, that's for
Why
sure.
why do they give these to you? Why have they chosen you to do that?
Because it's sort of a happenstance. There was the Canadian government had its own version of the X-Files. Really, it was called the non-meteoric sightings file, and people were reporting UFOs. It was getting reports from police officers and pilots, except that there were due to budget cuts, and they didn't want to have a budget line which is made public that says UFO reporting agency in the government. The political climate was such that they wanted to get rid of it. So they said, we're going to close it down, but we know that the reports are still going to come in. And when I was in Ottawa, in one of the government offices, talking with some of the scientists there, I said, well, if you close it down and you get the reports, just send them to me, sort of half jokingly. And about a year or two later, I had a phone call from a major, I can't remember his last name now, at an Air Force base saying, are you the guy we're supposed to be sending the UFO reports to? And I said, yes, absolutely. And
Please send them over, all of them.
uh, yeah, and ever since then, I've been getting the UFO reports, which is, remarkable when you think about it, that I really became the Fox Mulder, and I document a lot of what I've received and a lot of the people I've spoken to in my books. My next book is coming out and next year, and I tell exactly how this began and the investigations that I'm aware of, and how I know the Canadian government, in conjunction with the American government, have been doing some investigations and tracking this down. So there really is some meat on the bones in all of this.
And so, in today's atmosphere, how do you see this? Because quite a bit of this was in the past. Are these real? Is this real? Now there's a different take on it, and a whole new generation of people that they just kind of accept that maybe that's real. So,
Hmm.
what's current today in terms of how the governments are speaking again or working with this? What's their position now?
Well, of course, we're currently in a challenging time politically. We do know, for example, in Canada, that there had been some desire for United States to be more involved in the Canadian North and in security, because, of course, some concerns about Russian missiles and drones and whatever coming over the pole. So there is a beefed up security in northern Canada right now, and there's a report, as I mentioned, from Canadian government that was released just a matter of months ago, that suggests that there should be an agency in Canada keeping more track of UFOs, and how it should focus, and who should be in charge, and that type of thing. And that is partly in response to what's happening in the United States, and partly in response to requests in that regard. We do know the United States. Some of your viewers and listeners might have heard of the AARO, the All Domain Advanced Anomaly Research Office, um, which is the Pentagon's study of UFOs. We do know that they're getting reports constantly. The trouble is, in the same way that Canada has all the information about what was shot down in 2023, we don't have a lot of information about what's going on in the United States with regard to the Pentagon's investigation. They put out little snippets now and then, but we don't really have a lot of information. But in Canada, we have a great deal of information. So I think Canada's role would be to be more transparent and be sort of the public face of what's going on. And since Canada is partnered with the United States in NORAD, we can actually share more information about what's being seen by witnesses, whether military or civilian. So, the more people are interested in the fact that there's going to be bodies that are accepting UFO reports, and I hope that I'm going to be hearing some of those, that I think we can move forward trying to understand the UFO phenomenon, not just the nuts and bolts plasma toroidal ships that are being developed, but maybe in terms of how it's affecting individuals that there I mentioned worldviews are being shattered, and belief systems, and people are getting very anxious, and they need some guidance and some counseling actually. So I'm
Right.
hoping that we can go hand in hand with not just the physical aspects, but the psychological and paraphysical aspects as well.
I think that's important, and it's a great point because, the story of Travis Walton, for example, and that's coming front and center again, and it's a whole nother revisit to someone that actually was abducted, and then, how that changed their life and what went on with that. Now, I just want to point out, since you're up there and near,
Mm-hmm.
Alberta is a province that has quite a bit of sightings on account of this Edmonton hotspot.
Mm-hmm.
And if the US, and I know this is a political hot thing on your plate up there now, but if the US were to acquire Alberta as a province, one of them, which is kind of odd because it's only one, how would you, how would the US safeguard that one province airspace? Because it's in between, say, the province next door that you're in, and then the one on the coast, and there
Right.
just be an area. But it's very curious to me that that is the one province only that wants to secede or be acquired. And I find this curious in lieu of the UFO activity and the government um, being there with a base in Edmonton, and all of this activity is happening. So, what do you have to say about that kind of political framework and the airspace itself? Because these things move all over the place, but what would they be interested in there? Why would that area be hot?
Well, that's a good question. Lot to unpack there. One of the features of Alberta is that it's the site of two very prominent um, military bases. One's Suffield, and the other one is Cold Lake. And both of those were locations where the United States actually tested cruise missiles. And it's very wide open. They have a lot of land without any population. So that's one reason that could be done. The other thing is that Alberta is um, sort of the oil capital of Canada. It's the Texas of Canada. In fact, a lot of the oil that is piped down into the United States, and they're working on pipelines, they're existing pipelines now too, go from Alberta directly into the United States. In fact, Canada is one of, I think, if not but the greatest exporter of oil into the United States. A lot of your oil and fuel comes directly from Alberta. So that's certainly one thing. There has been some discussion about Albertans wanting some secession. I think the percentage is actually still quite low, and it's difficult to figure out how that might happen because it would involve royal assent, and it's a
It's
complicated thing, and
complicated, yeah.
yeah, very, very complicated. Yeah, it would be very difficult to imagine how that would
Well,
actually
that's what
happen.
I mean, is how would you protect the airspace either side of that one province? That's very strange. I mean, you'd be basically taking a rectangle and trying to protect it. But it brings me back to the aliens and what they're doing and why they come visit, and what is there, has anyone even been able to say this is why they're here, or there's some reason that they're here
Hmm.
too.
Well, yeah, it's difficult to say why they would come anywhere. One of I mean, one of the issues that we have is that, right now with so many satellites and Starlink and everything, you can actually find out pretty well everything about the world, what's going on the ground, without ever going down onto the ground. You don't have to land on Earth to find out what's going on. Even just monitoring TV transmissions or podcasts like this, they'll find out more information than you need by actually landing. I mean, there's some argument about, you have to take a soil sample just to be sure, but for the most part, you don't have to do anything like that. So why would they be coming to Earth in the first place? And that's a really good question. One of the things is that Earth has water, liquid water, and that's something that's very rare in the galaxy, we think, because of the way that stellar evolution and planetary evolution goes. It's possible that life is actually very, very rare in the galaxy, and they're finding more and more exoplanets. And the most recent, I think they found a habitable zone around a star that's not too far away from us. But it could be that life, like us, is very, very rare. And let's say there's only a handful, relative handful of civilizations like ours or more advanced than ours, I hope, that that are in the galaxy. This would be a perfect reason to come visit to say hi. But you know how Star Trek has that, the rule that you can't interfere with the development of a civilization. Well,
Yes.
we're really, really close to blowing ourselves up. So maybe they'll wait for a while before they attempt to contact us.
Well, I think that there's been in the more spiritual, or we'll call it metaphysical communities, there's a thought that they've been given the decree to interfere with any kind of nuclear things, and that that is not supposed to be what happens at the end of the day. So we could
Hmm.
hope for that.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a number of organizations, some of the contactee groups going back many, many years. George Hunt Williamson's group from the 1950s, it's still in existence. And their members actually pray and into what's called prayer batteries, I think it's the term, and they charge it up in the various chapters that they have around the world, and their goal is to prevent wars and conflict and that type of thing. And so far things are going relatively well, I suppose. But I mean, this has been going on for some time, and we there's been a hope that if the aliens are very advanced in terms of technology, you'd think that they would also be advanced spiritually and intellectually. And so if they are advanced to the point of traveling between stars and planets, perhaps they have a solution to not just, cures for cancer but how to prevent poverty and famine and all that type of thing, but also a way to raise us more spiritually, mentally, so we can achieve a greater, higher level. Because Lord knows, we should probably get a little higher in our level or
I mean,
evolutionary level.
I was going to say maybe children think the same way of adults on Earth. Maybe
That's
somebody
right.
could, unfortunately, they get disappointed. But, you know, um, do you believe that from the people you've spoken to, that they have a positive approach? Because there's two factions. We have a lot of underground bases here in the west
Mhm.
of the United States, and in New Mexico and so on. And they've said that there's a lot of experimentation that goes on there and genetic altering, and that's pretty common knowledge at this point in society since 2019. Now it's kind of come out, but
Mhm.
have you experienced in your work that the effect on people is positive or it's negative from their encounters?
That's also a very good question. This comes from diametrically opposite opinions. David Jacobs, the author of a number of books on abductions, he's sort of in the viewpoint of a negative experience, whereas other individuals, Bud Hopkins and so forth, are more positive. And um, they often would get into arguments about, whether people's experiences were positive or negative, but they kind of miss the point that, it's a very personal experience. And I think if you approach the subject um, from a positive viewpoint, you're going to have a positive experience. If you are anxious and terrified and your life is, you think everything is miserable and the world is falling apart, well, then you're probably going to have negative experiences. And I think changing your viewpoint and changing your opinion, and just being more receptive to your experiences will, be more advantageous to you, and you'd be more open to whatever message that is being directed at you.
So you really think that there's a faction of good or bad aliens, and let's say if your frequency is in a higher position, you might attract, if you're going to have an experience like this at all, you might um, attract a better faction of aliens versus, let's say, a negative, like you walking down the street in LA and you take a wrong turn and you go into a bad neighborhood, partially because of your own frequency, whereas other people would never venture that way, so they would never have that experience.
Yeah, I think you have to go into things with your eyes wide open, and not consciously seek negative issues, for sure.
Interesting. That's a really interesting point of view because you are a scientific researcher. So your
Mhm.
your whole presentation and all your books is based on science. And yet you're talking to that human component in there that says, we all want to get along and we want to have a positive outcome to this experience, whatever it may be. So in your research, how much of it has been dedicated toward these cases of people actually either being abducted and or just having an encounter?
Um, well, I would say um, close encounter cases are very, very rare now. They used to be much more frequent, but it's very rare for us to even get landing or trace cases now. Abductions, when they first became, really, really prominent in the late 80s, early 90s, there were a lot of people who were coming forward with that. And I think Omni had a survey that suggested about, 20% of the population may have had experiences like that. Now, it probably was a little high, because they're asking their own readership, but I think there's a significant number that were actually occurring. Now, in terms of um, uh, whether it's happening more often or less often, I would have to say that the nuts and bolts close encounters cases are going down, whereas the more spiritual encounters are going up in number. I think that's
So the
pretty that's pretty true.
our consciousness might be raising or the veil is thinning and people are having these kind of encounters without necessarily being beamed up or you know
Yeah,
frozen
and
in
and
time.
and also that despite a lot of the stuff that's being claimed on TV shows and podcasts about physical objects being encountered and things being detected under the ocean and zipping down and metamaterials and all that sort of stuff, it hasn't been very convincing. And so people are looking for something that is more meaningful to them. And if I watch a show on TV that says, this particular pilot saw something that was flying circles around his jet, that's really, really cool. But, you don't hear about those cases all the time. You hear about them once in a while, and the number of cases is, not that significant. But if I have had an experience or my neighbor has had an experience, I mean, you can go to a party or to a dinner or to a bar or something and mention UFOs, and you'll have people saying, yeah, I my next door neighbor said he saw something, and my cousin's wife, had something happen. The collective unconscious is that there's something really going on, and people are hesitantly willing to talk about it. Now, it's interesting that the American AARO Pentagon study or ongoing group is had put in a note that they want the stigma of UFO sightings and encounters to go down. They're encouraging pilots to report things even if they think they're going to be ridiculed. They want that to go away. And as I mentioned, 10% of the population believe they've seen UFOs. That's a lot of people. If 10% of the population broke out in purple spots from eating strawberries, you wouldn't have strawberries being eaten very much anymore. So, if 10% of the population are seeing UFOs, maybe that's an indication that the subject should be studied a little bit more. And with the American study and the Canadian study that I mentioned, there seems to be a shift in taking more notice of what people are reporting, which I think is a good thing.
Have you ever had an encounter?
No, and I've been out from one coast to the other, talking with people, and I've been, in fields late at night with people who are signaling and all this, but I've never had something I would describe as a real encounter. I've also been not ghost busting, but ghost hunting and in haunted homes and attended seances, and I've been out investigating Sasquatch. Haven't mentioned
Right.
Dogman yet.
We'll get
Uh,
into that in just a minute. But
yeah.
I have to your point about the oceans, and you're saying it isn't really validated, they're going down in and so on. That was my sighting. I was sitting in the Sunset restaurant on the end of Zuma Beach in Malibu, having
Hmm.
dinner, looking basically northwest up the
Hmm.
coastline. It was dark out. The only thing that was light was the floodlight outside the building. And my friend I was at dinner with was staring at my face. She was watching me and looking at me like, what are you looking at? And then she turned
Hmm.
around to look too. And it came straight up the coast. I thought it was an airplane. It had a light on it. It was very bright. Came up the coast, came right toward us in the restaurant right off the beach, and kind of did a little jiggle and then
Hmm.
darted. And I mean like
Zoom.
fast,
Yeah.
just zoomed out into the ocean and went straight down. And they say that
Wow.
there's a shelf there, and it just went straight into the ocean. So,
Mhm.
I, you know,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah, the
know,
one
but
the underwater case I was referring to were some of the ones where the submarines say that these things were zipping around the submarines, and yet for some reason we don't have the sonar tapes. We don't have a lot of the observations from people who had seen it under the water, but we do have cases like yours of people seeing things drop down into the ocean and then conversely going up. In fact, my Canada's UFOs Declassified, I think I listed maybe 10 cases where people had observed objects going in or coming out of the water.
directly in,
Um,
like it just
yeah,
faster than you can imagine. And there's no
yeah,
way it could have moved the way an airplane cannot even maneuver like that. It just
yeah,
couldn't. And I
yeah.
wasn't alone in witnessing that. But I I don't want to interrupt your presentation. We've kind of gone off on a tangent. I want to get into Dogman and into Sasquatch a little bit because this is part of your research,
Hmm.
and you took that paranormal research and you were a forerunner to this in what's really going on out there.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I could go on and show a lot more slides, but I think it's more valuable to have this conversation, asking me questions and responding because a slide is a slide, and people can
well,
always get my books.
yeah, that's right, and we can even do it again. But let's talk about your research with Sasquatch and kind of the paranormal and Dogman and maybe what
Hmm.
they might be to us in this world. How have you come into an understanding around Sasquatch? Let's start there because some say it's beings that move through portals and you move through the portal and experience those beings, some peacefully. That was one of my first interviews ever on radio, was a fellow that's doing that in Washington State. And then others have really terrifying experiences. So what's your knowledge base of this creature?
Well, as I mentioned, one of my first books was about all sorts of phenomena that were people were being reported in our part of Canada. And once I started doing that, people were contacting me from all across Canada. And I've traveled a little bit. I've been to the West Coast. I've been into Washington State, but in British Columbia, there are many, many stories about Sasquatch and Bigfoot. In fact, there's some amazing Bigfoot museums in British Columbia. There's actually a housing development in a place called Osoyoos and Kelowna, called Bigfoot Trail, and you can actually live in Bigfoot Trail because there's so many. And there's actually a giant Bigfoot statue at the entrance to this particular housing development. So there's a lot of that, and but researchers have found that there have been creatures like Bigfoot or other things called differently across North America and indeed around the world. Yeti in Mongolia and so forth, swamp monsters in Louisiana, and so forth. And there have been I produced a list of probably 50 or 60 Sasquatch reports that have been filed just in our particular province of Manitoba. So they're all over. And I talked with people who swear, hunters who swear that they've seen things, tufts of hair that were found on fences. As a matter of fact, just before talking with you today, I was talking with one of my associates, and she has been contacted by a fellow here in Manitoba who's been taking videos in his yard. He has arrays of cameras set up, and he has, excuse me, has caught some creatures that are, on video
But
that
are
are
they
pretty.
dogmen or Sasquatch?
Well, it's
What do they
hard to
look like?
tell. They didn't look like the classic, big hairy guy. Those were something a little bit more, smooth.
Leaner. Yeah, leaner. Unless you're
So it's
talking
hard to tell.
about crawlers.
Pardon
Have you
me?
heard about crawlers?
Crawler things that are the black creatures moving along the ground. Yeah, we've heard about all sorts of interesting creatures. Matter of fact, there's a fellow here in Manitoba who has a book out on everything from crawlers, and there's one category called giant beavers with long tails that are seen along riverbanks and so forth. So there's just a multitude of cryptids. I'm a fanatic of Fortean phenomena, and there's so many creatures in different types of categories that people have reported, and lake monsters. I remember being out in a boat with a master class fisherman who had won many awards, and he says, I saw this thing and it came out of the water and it had its neck and he says it wasn't a sturgeon, and it wasn't this, and it wasn't that. I know what I've seen, and I've been fishing this water for 40 years. And what do you do with cases like that? It's part of the mystery of our world that people have seen so many amazing things, and rather than the debunkers just turning their backs and saying, "Oh, yeah, they're crazy, they're drunk, whatever," you know, it's a human experience, and I think we should be talking more and listening more, as you say.
Yeah. And so tell us what you know about Sasquatch and what you've come to understand even equally about Dogman.
Well, I tend to be a more physical phenomena. I mean, I've seen plaster casts of Sasquatch prints. There have been a couple, and that have been happening here. I've talked with some of the Sasquatch hunters, John Huffnagel, I can't remember his name now, who passed away recently out on the West Coast. I've been at conferences talking with him, and I think the evidence for a giant creature, there's ape-like and gorilla-like creatures on every continent, with the exception of North America, that have been recognized by zoologists. So why couldn't there be, a remnant of Australopithecus or somebody in North America? Question is, what do they eat? Why, do we see one or two of them at a time and not whole families? Although yes, there are stories of people seeing larger numbers, but for the most part, people see one, and it's hidden and it dashes across roads and things like that. There's a great story of here that I investigated, of a woman who was driving during a rainstorm in a very rocky and hilly area of Canada, and she came around a corner, and a big hairy creature with the kind of wet, so the matted hair, walked right across the road in front of her, and she slammed on the brakes, and she ended up having a injury to her forehead from hitting the steering wheel, and she had to be taken to a hospital. So, when you get things like that that seem really physical, and there are prints left behind, it's to me, it's more of a physical creature more than anything else. Now, I've talked with people who said, these things just disappeared and they vanished, and that as if they were going in and out of portals. I don't know what to make of that. The scientist in me says doesn't seem possible, and yet I've talked with people who said that they've seen that happen. So I'm more of the physical Sasquatch and Bigfoot camps more than anything else personally, just from what I've seen from talking with people and going out into the woods and finding them myself.
And what about dogman? Have you talked to people that have encountered them?
A couple, people have seen something a little bit, um, long faces, very, very slender, not slender man, of course, but, a little bit more different than that, don't seem to be Sasquatch. They don't seem to be panthers and that type of thing. They seem to be something else, and they seem to be prowling. Sometimes they seem to be standing on two legs and sometimes four. What do you do with cases like that? Because I'd like to have more prints from
Right.
Dogman and things like that.
And they say in terms of cryptozoology that if people try and take pictures of these creatures, they don't show up on their film.
The cameras don't work, yeah. And which is strange, for film, why wouldn't they work for film? But video, video, you'd think you'd be able to see what's out there. So maybe we need better video cameras, things that see into the infrared. And I know you can fiddle around with your iPhones to get them to see into the infrared and ultraviolet. So maybe we have to do a little bit more of that.
Well, if we have cameras everywhere and we have Google watching over, and like you said, you can go into anywhere now and actually see what's there in real time.
Hmm.
How could we not, with all the technology to go to outer space and so on, how could we not have these things front and center for us, even in capturing that somehow on a blip? I mean, if the military can see, body heat and other things, why couldn't they track this if these things have blood and are made with a heart and so on?
Yeah, maybe in fact, maybe these things are more akin to ghosts and apparitions, spectral in nature, rather than, dogman, all fours creatures. Like me, they're not physical creatures. They're more like ghosts. Or they're in that realm. That would, tend to explain some of that.
It's interesting. Well, there's certainly a lot of accounts of that. Now,
Mhm.
going back to your research with the books that you've written, as you look back over your career of writing and researching, what's your overall take of what you've put together over time? What's your conclusion of what you've seen?
Oh, well, bottom line, there are very unusual phenomena that don't seem to have explanations. I think that science has done a disservice in general. The scientific community has done a disservice by not being willing to investigate, not being willing to listen to witnesses of strange phenomena, whether they were UFOs or Sasquatch or lake monsters or ghosts or whatever. I think the subject has been muddied by a lot of people who are essentially grifting, making up stories just to make a few bucks and then fool people. I think we actually caught people making crop circles. So there's always going to be people like that. Um, but at the same time, there are some sincere people out there who have had extraordinary experiences, like the Mr. Mihalik, who had the close encounter. You can't deny that he was physically injured by something. So it's walking the fine line between science and um, paraphysical phenomena. And
Mhm.
a lot of scientists avoid that like the plague, because anything that they can't touch, smell, or feel, has to be ignored. But at the same time, scientific advances are sometimes made simply by listening and trying to gather the data. And we need the data. We need to talk to more people who have had experiences. And I think that's where we are right now, that um, a lot of scientists are grudgingly saying, let's take a closer look at this. Let's gather the data. You may have heard of the Galileo project, where um, there are these observation stations that are being set up across North America with cameras and infrared, and microphones and all this sort of stuff, looking up and trying to detect everything that's in the sky. And they're using AI to, differentiate between airplanes and clouds and leaves and birds and all that sort of stuff. And this has just been started like within the past year. So you give us 10 years and, you let AI learn what's in the sky and what isn't. And, maybe we'll have some evidence of things that are up there that, we can't explain.
Thank you. Well, you were leaving off in your presentation visually with the Edmonton Airport report. And you
Mhm.
were saying that the Canadian government was much more friendly to being honest about this and having their pilots talk about it versus, let's say, the United States. What have you learned that these governments are either protecting and or exposing? Like, what is the point of them reporting that? And then why is your country more friendly to it than, say, mine?
Well, I think the thing is, it's very possible that the military governments aren't any further ahead. It would be very embarrassing for the government or the Air Force to say, these things are real, but we have no idea what they are. But don't worry, we have it all under control. Well, you don't have it under control because you don't know what these things are. Like the drones that people are seeing, we don't know what these things are. We think they're drones, but maybe they're not. I don't know. You're hearing that from government officials. But if they took the time to actually investigate and get more information, I think that we'd be much further ahead. So transparency, I think, is the name of the game, and there's a big push for it in Canada. Hopefully, it'll happen in the United States, and maybe with greater cooperation between countries, we'll be able to solve some of the mysteries.
Thank you. And you put in a lot of time toward getting to the bottom of it. You also have studied some top secret projects that were in the 50s. Can you talk about that a little bit? What those were and exactly how they impacted?
Sure. Well, I mean, there have been, not just in the United States, but in Canada and also around the world, a number of countries have had secret and classified UFO projects. There was something called Project Blue Book in the United States that many people will have heard of. There are TV shows about it. In Canada, there was something called Project Magnet and also Project Second Story, which were in the 50s, and they were guided by science and by military departments to try and understand what people were seeing in the sky. A lot of those cases have been made public. A lot, through access information requests were finally made public. That in Canada, the studies finished in the 1960s, but we do think that they kept on going. As a matter of fact, I've proven that they've kept on going because I have documents from military and police and so forth going right up to the present time. They didn't stop in the 60s. We do know that kept on going. And some of the cases are actually about American military personnel who have seen things in the Canadian files. We have cases in Nova Scotia, for example, where FBI agents had received reports of things that are going on by military or FBI personnel that were in Canada. Those cases haven't been made public in the United States, but we know that they were made public in Canada. So we do know that the Canadian experience is kind of a model for this. In the United States, there still is some secrecy. We still don't have, people have probably seen the video of what was seen off the coast of California of the pilots who had seen these things, and it was seen with infrared and heat detection and so forth. Well, we don't have the full video. We don't have the official reports. We don't have a lot of the documentation. We have the testimony of the pilots, but we don't have official reports. So there still is some classification going on. And I have to say, in a lot of cases, that's justified. You don't want to release information that will give away some of the technology that is being tested that will eventually be used, elsewhere in the world. You don't want to give away exactly how these things perform. There are cases, for example, of UFO reports from military maneuvers in the Gulf of Arabia, but a lot of that is classified, and rightly so. So while a lot of it, is overclassified in some cases. We don't want to err on the other side and just release all the information because that wouldn't be in the best interest either. So classification is very, very good, but it causes issues as well.
Have you ever heard of stories in Asia or in Japan? Because, we really are talking about it here as Americans or Canadians or Europeans, but I've never heard of anything in Asia. Is there?
Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, one of my books, The World of UFOs, goes across all continents. But there are, in fact, Project Blue Book lists many cases of military reports. In fact, there's a very interesting report from Vietnam during the Vietnam War, where at one of the bases, I guess outside of Da Nang or something like that, um, a UFO was seen off the coast near an aircraft carrier. And when it was seen, all the lights and power on the aircraft carrier went out because of the proximity of the UFO. And these are documented. We have the documents on these types of things. In terms of other parts of Asia, there are actually UFO groups in China and India. We don't hear a lot coming out of China, but it's actually there are UFO civilian, investigators that are in China, and we do get reports from there. So it really is a global phenomenon. We hear mostly from North America because there are UFO groups and investigators in all states, and so we tend to hear more about what's happening here. But nevertheless, don't be dissuaded. There are cases from literally all around the world.
And so people often say, particularly in metaphysical communities, oh, do you see that cloud? That's a mothership. Do you believe in that? Do you believe that in your research, have you found that certain cloud formations actually are cloaking as a craft of some sort?
I have to say personally, I don't really go into for the mothership thing. The clouds, whether they're cloaking or not, I mean, it would be possible theoretically for an alien craft to make itself look like a cloud. But for the most part, people see flying saucers and UFOs all the time anyway. So the purpose of cloaking when rest of the time it's not cloaked doesn't seem to make much sense to me personally. There are reports of very large UFOs. There was one in the Yukon that was said to be about a mile wide. And everybody probably heard of Phoenix, again, something very, very large. So, there are reports of very, very large objects, but I would argue that, the really large ones probably stay in orbit or somewhere on the moon and just send the smaller ones because, you don't need the destroyer class
Right.
ones to fly into Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah. So we're looking at the totality of this. Now, as you look forward, where are we headed with this kind of research? Where is this now taking us?
Well, I think we're probably just maybe a dozen years away from astronomers verifying that there's a habitable planet very close to us in our galaxy, and identifying which one probably has life very much like us. So we're probably, probably not that far away from actual contact with alien civilizations. A lot more sooner than most people realize. Now, spiritually, metaphysically, maybe some of that has already occurred because you can have action at a distance, according to some people. And so whether something is 100 light years away or just nearby wouldn't make a difference in terms of psychic ability. But in terms of physical contact, I think the evidence is there that we're not alone in our galaxy. We're not alone in the universe. There are civilizations probably much more advanced than we are. And if they're much more advanced than we are, they've probably solved a lot of the problems that we're dealing with here on Earth. Um, I like saying I've seen no evidence of intelligent life on Earth, but
Yeah,
hopefully
yeah.
out there.
You mean an up-leveling of consciousness after thousands of years or
Yeah,
millions?
something like that. Yeah.
We hope for that anyway. So
Yeah.
have you ever talked to anybody that's had a near-death experience and could comment back on this subject matter? Have you run into anyone like that?
I really never studied that as much. I mean, I've had friends who have said that they've known somebody who've done that, and being affiliated with the Winnipeg Paranormal Group, that's they've some of them have studied a little bit more. I know of the stories, but I haven't really studied myself.
All right. Well, is there a specific blog or post that you're doing today that we can have people come and follow you along with? What is it that you're doing now?
Um, I think I blogged fairly recently. My main blog is um, is uforum.blogspot.com, and that's where I have a lot of documents and things. I talk about what people are seeing. I'm also on Facebook. I'm one of the admins on the UFO Updates Facebook page, and people can follow along. There's always some discussion going on there. And also the Canadian UFO Survey is published every year. It's been published every year since 1989, documenting all the cases that people are seeing. And there's all my books. So I seem to be all over the place. And I'm on not just X, but also Blue Sky, and on Instagram. So I'm all over the place.
So people can get your books on Amazon, right? And
Yep.
they can follow you there as an author as well. And they can find you on all social media, pretty
Mhm.
much. And so they can follow along. I want to say thank you, Chris, for taking time out. And your expertise in the field is really rare. How much you've put into your actual scientific documentation in your books and what you are offering in the presentation we were doing earlier is extensive. And so I invite everyone to go out and get the books and study for themselves and follow along, because you really have taken time in these to showcase what is going on in a very neutral position, which is really nice. It's kind of taking that data and showing it to people, and you have a great humor about you too. So I just want to say thank you for coming to Making Life Brighter and sharing this. And this is important because it's a common topic, more so than people think. And I have a question I ask everyone. What makes your
Okay.
life brighter?
Um, my wife. She is very supportive, and Lord knows she doesn't have to be some of the stuff that I drag her into with this. But she's very supportive, and is always there with a smile, and she even laughs at my jokes sometimes. So
That's beautiful. I have to say that when I ask that question, the majority of the people stop and reflect, and they always say something like that with their family member. It's like, you could give the something makes me happy in life, but it's such a pleasure to have people come from their heart and speak of their other halves or their families and so on. And so thank you for being you in our world and sharing all of what you do and putting it in books so that we can follow along, because I think that's really important. So there you have it, everybody. Mr. Chris Rutkowski, and he is a science writer. He's a researcher. He's an astronomer, and he's an author of many books about ufology. Did I say that right?
sure.
So thank you for being here with us, and we would like to maybe have you back and speak again if we go along further and research this even further. So
Sure.
maybe we can go live one night. You can answer questions to people. That would be super.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Chris. And go jolly, everyone. You're listening to Making Life Brighter Radio, and we have been talking about ufology today, and we have some more upcoming on that and some new things that are out that I want you to focus on. So we will talk again soon. Go jolly.